Now, to help make this case and to broaden his appeal, to broaden his appeal to the GOP rank and file in what's expected to be the lead up to a potential 2016 presidential run, Ryan has tapped this guy, Bob Woodson, the black conservative founder of the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. He's seen here testifying at a budget committee hearing on poverty 2 weeks ago. But here's the question. Besides Woodson, who else does Paul Ryan have to help him sell what today's Huffington Post calls an approach to poverty that's straight out of the 19th century? Arthur Delaney is a reporter with the Huffington Post and author of the piece I just mentioned, and Michael Denzel Smith is a contributor at The Nation. And I will start with you first, Arthur, because your piece really talks about Paul Ryan's sort of approach to poverty and sort of takes it back to the English poor laws and this notion of the undeserving versus the deserving poor. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. So throughout this country's history, and even before that, there has been suspicion that poverty is caused solely by economic conditions. A lot of people believe there's also got to be a moral component to that. In other words, that people's individual failings are the reason they can't get ahead. And in the 1870s, there had been a worldwide depression and a tramp crisis. People were worried about these tramps going from city to city, soaking up private charity. This is before there was any government welfare at the federal level. And people started a backlash against this, a charity reform movement that lamented the evil of indiscriminate soup. They said, we're giving these tramps too much soup. It's making everything worse. Instead of soup, we need to give these people friendship and love. And I found that those comments are remarkably similar to what Paul Ryan has been saying lately about poverty. And when you look into conservative historians, there's a book by Marvin Olasky that specifically lauds the charity reform efforts of the Gilded Age of the late 1800s. That was very popular with Newt Gingrich in the 90s when they did welfare reform. And, of course, that was when Paul Ryan was a congressional staffer, and that has been his model for what he wants to do to other poverty programs.
No, and it's interesting, Michael, because when you talk about Paul Ryan, often we think of Ayn Rand being kind of the touchstone for where his philosophy comes from. But this is sort of an interesting sort of side take, right, that it comes from this kind of Gilded Age movement where the idea was that private charity would kick in. Because the Ayn Rand piece is private charity isn't even something interesting because the poor are just a drain on society. So it's a slightly different take.
Yeah, essentially Paul Ryan's ideology is that the poor don't work, and they don't work hard enough to get themselves out of poverty. And then that government has somehow failed them by giving them handouts. And I think we have to give Paul Ryan some credit. He's right that the government has failed the poor. He's placing the responsibility on the wrong programs. We have seen an amassing of wealth and a distribution of wealth to the top 1% and the top 0.1% in this country over the course of our history, and no real program that addresses poverty or that aims to alleviate poverty in any real way.
I mean, and when you talk about those $800 billion worth of anti-poverty programs, Arthur, the biggest one, of course, is the anti-poverty programs targeted at the elderly, meaning Social Security and Medicare. Those are the biggest bulk of our anti-poverty spending. And Paul Ryan actually has been quite aggressive about wanting to do privatization there, to have the free market get into that. Is Bob Woodson sort of the cover for even that part of his philosophy, or what is Bob Woodson bringing to the table in terms of this whole anti-poverty, quote, agenda that Paul Ryan's putting forward?
Bob Woodson is not a cover. I think Paul Ryan has genuinely and earnestly wanted to find out what he can learn from somebody who has more of a ground-level perspective on non-governmental efforts to help poor people help themselves, and that's what Bob Woodson has done all his life. He's not simply a conservative or, and much less a flaming right-winger. He's somebody who thinks a lot of what the government does and has done has been very good for poor people. For instance, retirement programs and also food stamps eliminating hunger. So I don't know. We don't know yet what additional proposals Paul Ryan is working on, but there are some things coming out this summer, and it just remains to be seen exactly what he's after. Bob Woodson himself does not know. Right,
and Michael, when you talk to particularly African-American conservatives, that is the argument they make, is that we have to have these outside government programs to reduce dependency. That's a sort of the culture of dependency argument that is made. Paul Ryan puts it that what the left is offering people is a full stomach and an empty soul. It's something that sucks the sort of an initiative and drive out of people in these urban communities. What kind of credence do you give arguments like that?
None.
In a word.
Like, there's no credence to that at all. These people are working incredibly hard. That's part of the problem, is that they're working so hard and they're not being compensated for it. Like the problem with poverty, like poor people are poor because they don't have money. Like that's what it boils down to. So if you want to argue that the government is inefficient in alleviating poverty and these programs are bloated and it's inefficient way to do so, let's just give poor people money, or let's give everyone money. Let's make a universal basic income so that everyone benefits and there is no poverty. Let's alleviate it in that way.
Yeah, and Paul Ryan ain't gonna go for that. Arthur, I'm wondering if there's any sense that you had from doing this research on this story that Bob Woodson is actually taking Paul Ryan in to see what Michael was just talking about, how hard poor people actually work, or is it more of a peripheral sort of journey into the world of the poor that only allows Ryan to sort of reinforce what he already believes? Is he taking him places where he can see the back-breaking daily work that poor people are actually doing in this country?
That's a great insight. It's not just about what are these programs outside of government that help the poor. I do think Bob Woodson has wanted to actually show poor people to Paul Ryan, but an important thing to remember is that the types of programs he's taken them to, for instance, House of Help, City of Hope here in D.C. and Maryland, we're dealing with reforming people who had been coping with drug addiction and homelessness. So these are actual specific problems that are different from the broader economic issue. And when you talk to Bob about economic statistics reflecting, more unemployed people than jobs available, he thinks that's sort of a BS story because he knows from his work that's something an unemployed person could use as an excuse. And I think that part of Woodson's message is definitely appealing to Ryan. Yeah,
well, because there are so many people who want jobs, but there are unfortunately not enough jobs for them to have. I think that's a statistic that you really cannot call BS on. But I really do appreciate your reporting. Fascinating piece that everyone should read in the Huffington Post by Arthur Delaney and also, of course, Michael Denzel Smith. Thank you both for being here. And we will be right back.